Actually, sir, we can proceed.
Yes. Yes. I am the Dean of School of Paramedical Sciences, Centurion University, Vizianagaram. I welcome you all for this criminal profiling futuristic approach in behavioral evidence analysis. First of all, I welcome our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor GSN Raju Sir, who is a man of international repute, internationally reputed electronics and communication engineering professor, having produced 55 PhDs and around 550 national and international publications. Is the chief editor of Electromagnetics Journal based at Bangalore, visited so many countries in specific Germany, authored more than 12 books, and a product of IIT Kharagpur. Now, I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir to inaugurate this webinar on criminal profiling, futuristic approach in behavioral evidence analysis. Also, I welcome the speaker, Anisha Chandran Madam Garu, and the Dean Forensic Science, Amulya Ratna Behra Sir, and HOD Nagaraja Sir, and our Vilas and Pravallika, and here in faculty of now I request to inaugurate the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Good morning, Anisha Chandran. Hello.
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Are you able to hear?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Yes. There is some noise from the other side. Good morning, Mr. Anisha Chandran and my colleagues. It's a great pleasure to invite the speaker to deliver a webinar on criminal profiling futuristic approach in behavioral evidence analysis. We thank you, madam, for coming forward to deliver a wonderful topic. As mentioned by Dr. Acharlu, Dean.
Sir, we missed your voice, sir.
I think sir is having a network issue.
It seems we missed the link. Vilas?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir is rejoining. Just a minute.
Yes, sir, joined, sir.
Sir has joined.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, sir. Audible, sir.
Hear suddenly? Could you hear now? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Again, one. Yeah. I welcome Madam Anisha Chandran to deliver a talk on criminal profiling futuristic approach in behavioral evidence analysis. And I'm very happy my colleagues, both from Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, are here. I thank Dr. Acharlu to initiate the proceedings. So, madam, I invite you sometime to our university and deliver a few seminars or workshop here at your convenience. So, I declare the webinar inaugurated. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Now I request our beloved registrar, Professor PSV Ramana Rao Garu, to please give a welcome address. Ramana Rao Garu. Registrar, sir.
Dr. Acharlu, you go with the webinar. There is a net problem.
Sir.
Don't waste any time. Madam, start
sir,
the
here
webinar.
signals are weak. Sir, good morning, sir. Somewhat signals are less in my area. Sir, please proceed, sir. Actually,
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, may I request Vataparthi Pravallika, the assistant professor in forensic, to speak about the topic and introduce the guest to the audience. Over to Pravallika.
Good morning.
Our today's guest, Anisha Chandran ma'am, is currently serving as the Assistant Professor of a Forensic Psychology Department in Jain University. She had done her master's degree in Forensic Psychology in Rakshati, and her bachelor's is in Law, Legal Sciences and Law from Government Law College, Mumbai. She is trained in an integrative approach of counseling and psychotherapy using the TA, transitional analysis and rational emotive behavioral therapy. She believes that everyone deserves a safe healing space to negative thoughts and various changes and difficulties life brings. She had worked closely with juveniles in conflict with law from the reform, rehabilitation and reintegration of delinquents at observation homes in Dongri, Mumbai. She worked with Vice Media to draw up a comprehensive behavioral analysis of the Netflix documentary Indian Predator. She was also projects cases related to death row prisoners, the criminal justice system, and legal investigations on Delhi, Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, and CBI CFSL Delhi. Ma'am, we are very glad to have you in today's session. I welcome you for the session, and now you can proceed with today's session, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Pravallika.
Thank you,
May I request
Pravallika.
Anisha Chandran ma'am to please initiate the proceedings. I welcome once again on behalf of Centurion University of Technology Management, Andhra Pradesh and Bhubaneshwar. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
Please
you,
initiate.
sir. Thank you so much. I hope you can all hear me and see me well. If one of you could just confirm if I'm audible
Yes, ma'am.
enough. Thank you. Thank you. So before starting, I would like to really thank all of you to give me the opportunity to present. I thank all the students and all the dignitaries present here. So without any further delay, I shall start with my presentation. Please allow me a moment to share my screen.
You can proceed. I'll stop.
Yeah, you can share your screen.
Yes, ma'am, you can share.
So could you tell me if it's visible, the presentation?
Yes, ma'am. Keep it in a presentation mode.
Yes. Is it visible now?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
Perfect.
So the topic we're going to be covering today is criminal profiling, a futuristic approach in behavioral analysis, behavioral evidence analysis. While most of us would be used to associating a criminal profiler as a grim, slightly bizarre individual who spends most of their time in prisons interviewing criminals, in reality, what they do, the job profile of a criminal profiler is far more fascinating and intellectually stimulating. So criminal profiling is a branch of forensics that literally offers a sneak peek into the criminal's mind, right? The accused's mind. Also known as offender profiling or psychological profiling. It is a popular forensic assessment tool that is used to identify possible suspects by analyzing certain patterns. It is an inductive and deductive reasoning technique that also helps law enforcement agencies and also investigative agencies to predict future offenses and victims. And criminal profiling is commonly applied to predictive profiling, suspect identification by establishing certain common patterns that we would talk about further into the presentation, and also sexual assault offender profiling. But it's important to note that many criminal profilers examine evidence for clients with the expectation of giving evidence in court, no matter what the circumstances are, and no matter what the ultimate agenda of the criminal profiler is. If they are any good, it would be considered that their testimonials and their expertise would be submissible in a court of law in order to answer certain legal and investigative questions. So in order to achieve that, they write certain, after the analysis and examination, they write clear, well-cited reports based upon their behavioral evidence analysis and examinations. But it's important to not confuse criminal profilers with mental health professionals, because they don't attempt to diagnose the crime scene or the criminal for that matter, unless they have those credentials and have conducted proper assessments, in which case they're not profiling a crime scene, but they're assessing a subject, right? So they would draw up a profile, a behavioral analysis of certain mental instabilities or disorders or disabilities that are causing the individual to behave the way they are. And the legal and investigative significance of this would be entirely different as opposed to drawing up a criminal profile, which is to give direction to investigation and to answer certain legal questions in a court of law. Moving further, sorry, just a minute. So, criminal profiling can be considered one of the more popular tools and instruments in forensic assessments to answer certain investigative and legal questions. In addition to clinical interviews, this is the most typically utilized in forensic settings. It is critical to demonstrate a strong link between the test and the legal issue at hand, meaning that whatever test or assessment is being applied has to be reliable, it has to be valid and scientifically conclusive. And it has to be relevant to the legal question at hand. So despite their extensive use, when selecting these tests to aid forensic assessment, it is very important that caution is maintained. Specific criminal profiling course objectives include identifying the relationship between the material or the physical evidence at hand and the behavioral evidence by inspecting certain crime scene photographs, recognizing the offender behavior, performing wound pattern analysis, and matching behaviors of certain serial rape or homicide killers to a crime scene. Okay, these are certain methods and processes that come under profiling, which we'll talk about more in detail. When we talk about criminal and behavioral profiling, there are 4 elements, components that would lay out the blueprint for how the profiling is done. So first thing that we look at is, like I said, the relationship between physical and the behavior traces that a perpetrator leaves behind. They are also leaving traces of their personality behind. So through those clues, we are able to identify and determine if the said suspect is, say, suspicious, or he's controlling, he's revengeful, he's lustful, he has greedy intentions or certain cognitive distortions, whether hallucinating or have illusions, certain irrational beliefs. When we talk about these traits, we're talking about basically how the individual thinks, feels, and in turn translates all those into their behavior, right? The second is behavioral tendencies. So whether they are highly impulsive or lack self-control, they're aggressive or have certain compulsions or aversions, phobias, whether they're organized or unorganized, whether it was a planned or unplanned commission of crime. All this through the physical evidence that is found at the scene of crime. Next point is demographic variables. So it is also possible to determine the person's age, their gender, ethnicity, marital status, alcohol, drug, or mental health issues, education, and employment status. Give you an example. Someone who say we've through the pattern of the crime and the nature of treatment of the victim, we are able to deduce that the potential suspect has certain paranoid personality traits and they're highly impulsive. It would be then logical to arrive at a conclusion that they are probably within the age group of, say, 40 to 50. Because also depending on the time at the crime, right? So paranoia is supposed to set in at your early 20s, and start to take form in your 40s and 50s. So depending on the gravity of the offense and the nature of the offense, you can arrive at a conclusion that the probable spectrum of the perpetrator is probably between 40 to 50. Next is evaluation of physical evidence. So belongings retrieved from an offender to draw a social and psychological picture of the offender helps the law enforcement agencies with strategies and suggestions for interviewing the suspect. Combination of all these components, what we are trying to identify are the twins of crime, which is basically mens rea and actus reus, right? So as we understand it, actus reus is the action or the actual commission of the crime, and mens rea is the guilty intention, the guilty mind, ill intention, malicious intent, as we call it, behind the actus reus. So it is through these components that we can maybe get to understanding what might be the motive behind committing the crime in the manner that it was. So in simple terms, offender profiling or criminal profiling is basically making inferences about the emotional, psychological, physical, habitual, and even vocational characteristics of a suspect in order to help answer certain investigative and legal questions. The construction and validation of specialized forensic assessment tools also, I want to just mention that you're all free to maybe unmute yourselves in between and ask questions if you feel that it is relevant to what is being discussed, unless you want to wait till the end. So I just wanted to yeah, give you a heads up that if there's anything that you want to ask or clarify or share or add, please feel to unmute yourself, and we would love to hear what you've got to say. Okay, next is the eventful history of criminal profiling, which is also known as a third generation of investigative science. It was actually in 19th century that the Scotland Yard began with its study of clues and traces and evidence, as we call it. And it was happening at a very rudimentary and infantile stage. Until that's the study of also led to the study of crime itself. So you can say it was somewhat the birth of criminology at that point, where there was an expansion of the scope of what the study of crime can yield. And we made a shift from studying crime to also studying the concept or analyzing the psyche of the offender, right? So again, when we say psyche, we mean the way they think, feel, and behave the way that they do. So it granted as a peephole into their mind, followed by certain psychological profiling and criminal case study descriptions, wherein a lot of forensic psychiatrists, forensic psychologists, and criminologists started working on profiling certain well-known offenders out there, like Jack the Ripper, who was known for killing prostitutes and ripping out their abdominal and visceral parts in London. The reason that his case was chosen as one of the case studies was because it was they were able to realize that I'm sorry, can you still see my screen in full screen?
Yes,
or
yes.
has it
Yeah.
grown smaller?
Yeah, it has gone smaller. Please go to presentation
It
mode.
has grown. So sorry.
Yeah, ma'am, it's good to go. Anisha ma'am, you're not audible. Speaker will join shortly. Pravallika ma'am. Pravallika ma'am.
Hello, I'm so sorry I got disconnected. I'm facing some network issues here. Pardon me. Okay, it says that the host has disabled participant screen sharing, so I'm unable to share my screen.
I have made you co-host. Please go ahead. You can share the screen now. Please try once again.
Sure. I hear you. Hello.
Ma'am, your voice is breaking. Seems your network is unstable, ma'am.
Hello. Right network connected still. Am I visible though? Am I audible? A little audible, and are my slides clear?
Yeah, you're visible, ma'am. Voice is clear. Yeah.
Okay, so should
Good to go.
I
Yeah.
continue in that case?
Yes. Please continue, ma'am.
Great. Thank you so much for the heads up.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, I'm talking about how criminologists and forensic psychiatrists and psychologists started working on drawing up behavioral analysis of certain infamous serial killers out there. One of the most was Jack, who was mutilating bodies of women. It was found that the skill and the proficiency with which the victims' bodies were mutilated, the removal of their internal organs led the investigators to believe that he had some anatomical or surgical the police surgeon was finally asked to examine the case, and after his case, on the most mutilated victim and the postmortem notes of his past murders, he was then able to create Jack the Ripper's profile based on his modus operandi, which is basically the mode of committing a crime. and certain signature personality traits. So the profile indicated that the murderer must be a physically strong individual who is quite composed in his temperament and also very bold and daring, and believed to be prone to periodic erotic and homicidal ideations as well, mania as we call it. And this particular police surgeon could also conclude that the murderer is suffering from an abnormal sexual condition that we call satyriasis. So towards the end, when they did arrive at these conclusions, they found out that it was very closely related to how the individual actually was. So that goes on to prove the efficiency and the significance of profiling, right, as an investigative and legal aid. Then they also drew up analysis of the mad bomber, who was, I think, who had bombed around a lot of places somewhere in New York, and that was for about 16 years. So since the police was trying for a very long time to capture this person, I think his name was George Metesky. The police on crime, examining the crime scene photographs. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Hello?
ma'am. Yeah.
I'm sorry, is there a problem? Am I not with?
No, no, no.
Hello?
Everything is fine. We can continue.
Thank you. So, as they found out by scrutinizing the crime scene photographs and the certain notes that the mad bomber had left, that he was probably in his 50s, that he was self-educated because of certain terminologies that he used. Also that he was maybe foreign born, he had paranoia, and was staying in a particular place with his sibling. All of this was deduced by the use of language and certain things that were mentioned by the person in his notes, and also by analyzing the crime scene photographs. So you can say it was a combination of what you call logical reasoning and didactic reasoning, along with psychology, to gain certain insights, right, into the psyche of the offender. Similarly, there were various others who were profiled, and it sort of set a solid foundation for using criminal profiling as one of the more efficacious forensic assessment tools in order to guide investigation in the right direction. Next comes behavioral evidence analysis, which is, you can say, an expansion of criminal behavior. It is an ideo-deductive method of crime scene analysis and criminal profiling. It involves the examination and interpretation of certain physical evidences with forensic victimology. So basically how the victim was selected, or what were the various criteria that went behind the perpetrator selecting that particular victim, how the victim was, and how the victim was treated, and also the crime scene characteristics. So under behavioral evidence analysis, there are certain protocols that a criminal profiler has to follow. There's something known as a threshold assessment, TA, which can be considered a preliminary investigation report that reviews certain physical evidences of the behavior of the perpetrator at an initial stage, along with, of course, victimology, as we talked about, and certain crime scene characteristics for a particular case, or a series of related cases, in order to provide immediate direction. So a series of immediate cases, those cases that share a lot of commonalities in terms of the way it was carried out, and the modus operandi, and the signature styles. So that, along with proper scrutinization of all crime scene documentations, the victim information, complete analysis and interpretation of the physical evidences by the necessary forensic professionals. So by sending it to offices whatever serology, toxicology, postmortem reports we need. That along with an analysis of all the other factors mentioned, we derive at a threshold assessment. So since it is a preliminary inference about the offender, it is not to be considered as a refined criminal profile, but as a tentative assessment, which would again help us narrow down certain criteria that we're looking for in the potential suspect. When we talk about crime scene analysis or crime scene investigation management, it is a process of interpreting the specific features of crime from all the evidences available from related crime scenes as well. So victim selection and targeting, as we talked about, the method of approach, an attack, how controlling the person was, what was the kind of location type that they chose, the nature and sequence of the sexual acts, violence, aggression, what it was that they were trying to derive from the particular acts committed, what were the materials used, what is the evidence of skill or planning, and how organized they were in their intention to commit the crime, whether there were any efforts to escape detection or manipulate evidence or misdirect the law enforcement, along with other things like is there any verbal activity, precautionary or contradictory acts, what was the modus operandi, the signature behavior, and the amount of time spent in the commission of the crime, would all come under the ambit of crime scene investigation, analysis, or management. Next is applied case linkage analysis, is also referred to as linkage analysis, which is the process of determining whether there are discrete connections or distinctive behavioral factors that associate two or more previously unrelated cases by means of crime scene analysis. So sometimes, and this is the case with most serial killers and serial predators out there, that they would usually have a signature style, modality of committing their crimes. Their victim selection and victim targeting would be of a certain kind. And the mens rea, the motive behind those crimes would also be similar. So even if the crimes are committed at geographically across vast geographical locations, by drawing up a pattern analysis of what is uniform and consistent in the manner that all those crimes were committed, you can arrive at a conclusion that it might be it is a possibility that it might be one person committing all those crimes, or maybe an alliance of one or two individuals. We'll talk more about this when we touch upon the topic of geographical profiling. Applied case linkage analysis also involves establishing and comparing the physical evidence, victimology, crime scene characteristics, motivation, and one signature behavior, which also requires consideration of both behavioral similarities and dissimilarities. Case linkage is also used, when I say forensic, I mean the legal and judicial aspects. I hope we all here understand, since we're students of forensic science, that the term itself means forensic means the application of certain legal and psychological principles in the court of law. So basically, when psychological principles are applied in order to answer certain legal questions, that's when we call it forensic psychology, and that's basically the forensic forum that we talk about. Then comes criminal profiling and crime scene analysis in post-conviction review. So it's not just pre-conviction, but also post-conviction, meaning that the trial has already taken place and the person might have been convicted even, but it's the defendant can appeal the process and will be claiming and could be claiming actual innocence. That may not be the case, but that is not the concern of the forensic examiner. They have to do their analysis in a very objective manner. So they would play their role by educating the investigators, the attorneys, and the courts, so that they can make better arguments and findings in the legal proceedings in order to arrive at just and fair judgments. Next, we talk about geographical profiling. Again, very interesting way of mapping out perpetrators and also where they might be operating from. So you can say it's an investigative technique that uses the locations of a connected series of crime to determine where an offender most likely lives or bases their criminal activities from. So it's mostly applied for serial murders or rapes, arsons, robberies, and bombings, as it is based on correlation of pattern analysis. So there has to be a pattern that is analyzed and established in order to be able to use geographical profiling. It is usually not recommended for cases where for one-time offenses. These are basically for repeat offenders or what we call career criminals or habitual offenders. Next is the process that comes under geographical profiling. First, we start with the foundational aspects of psychological profiling of the unknown subject. I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a typo there. Please ignore that. So when we talk about psychological profiling, we would be looking at the cognitive, the emotional, and the behavioral aspects of an individual. So we talked about the personality traits, behavioral characteristics, etc., etc. That would all come under psychological profiling. Then what we have to, like I said, remember is that it would be conducted as a criminal investigation when a series of crimes is committed, right? So all those crimes would be investigated using traditional means that the police or investigative agencies rely on. And once that is done, analysis is done to ascertain which of the crimes are linked and connected in order to arrive at certain conclusions. So geographical profiling, you can say, helps us arrive at the location of the crime site. It assesses and predicts the offender's most likely place of residence, where they work, their social venues and travel routes, along with a reconstruction and interpretation of their mental map, what their daily routine might be like. And it is even though it is a process, sometimes all these steps are happening more or less simultaneously. Because as we know, when we're talking about investigation, time is of the essence. When we're talking about serial offenders, they're very good at misleading investigation. And so all of this has to be done in a manner that we do not give the perpetrators much time to evade detection. Certain other factors include examination of the case file, witnessing statements, autopsy reports, and psychological profile reports. Then there are meetings and discussions with lead investigators of the case, revisits to the crime sites for further inspection of the crime scene and reconstruction of the crime scene, analysis of local crime statistics and demographic data, and an overall analysis and report submission would be the final stage of the process. When we talk about geographical profiling, certain important factors that are looked at into are first, offender type. So there are four that are categorized into four types of offenders. We have hunters, poachers, trollers, and trappers. So when we talk about hunters, as the name suggests, it's basically when an individual singles out one specific victim without leaving the territory where they reside, right? So they're out hunting and preying on victims, on vulnerable victims without leaving where they stay. Poachers are when they travel out of their territory and find potential victims, right? Trollers are when they rely on opportunistic encounters while they're occupied in other activities and then strike. So say, for example, they're running errands, but they find themselves in a lonely forest area where they see a person jogging by. They would consider, since they're opportunistic offenders, they would consider that as a favorable situation in order to be able to violate the vulnerability of that potential victim. The final offender type is a trapper who basically lures his victim using seemingly harmless strategies, right? So a lot of people with antisocial and psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies and traits are known to be very charming and manipulative in ways that might seem very non-threatening and harmless. But it's all with the intention to accomplish a a very vicious scheme that's going on in their minds. Right. Next comes hunting methods, which basically talks about the preferred victim type. So most offenders would have certain prerequisites and criteria, so to say, where they are searching for a suitable victim. There are very few out there who were very random in their killings. The mens rea in that case would probably be less dominant than a mental instability that would probably be able to explain that behavior. Otherwise, people have preferred victim types because it is directly related to certain adverse childhood experiences or certain factors that they were exposed to as children growing up, which causes them to develop certain fetishes or certain preferences, likings, or even aversions towards certain people who they consider as preferred targets. Next, under hunting method is the method of attack. So whether the perpetrator is choosing to attack from behind, or they go for strangulation or sedation, where they're rendering someone unconscious, or they're using force, that method of attack, the modus operandi, is also something that you can say is unique to every offender. Of course, they do share certain characteristics, but by being able to identify what the patterns between the methods of attack are, it is possible to again screen out which crimes of similar nature might have been committed by the same individual. Next is neighboring demographics. Also plays a huge role in victim selection or preference for or avoidance of certain locations. So if it's a highway, or it's a very isolated or socially a place where it's easy to escape or hide out, that is something that is very closely related to the preferred hunting sites, the next point. Right, so somewhere where it is easy, the victims are easily accessible, and also provides a possibility for the perpetrator to then escape after he's done committing the crime, or play a role in determining who commits the crime, on whom, and why. And that is what is also a major factor in geographical profiling. There are two more points, which are again closely related to the last 2 points, which is rapid transportation and easy escape. So bus stops and railway stations are hot spots for these people, or if they own their own vehicle, again, they consider that to work in their favor for obvious reasons. Then comes understanding the daily routine of their victims. Since it provides an insight into how the offender searches and selects his victims. So you can say there's some sort of homework done there before they can finalize whether this would be a safe bet, or there would be a lot of complications and risks attached to this, even though a lot of them are known to be reckless and negligent. There is some thought that goes into victim selection, more so from the perspective of deriving pleasure, whatever kind it is, that that depends on the mens rea of the individual. So for them, that is the primary agenda, and not to evade detection. That would be secondary. So it's a lot of thought goes into selecting their victims, and if it's possible to identify what was the thought process of the perpetrator while he was choosing all these victims, they can again draw an analysis of the patterns that you can see in order to then arrive at certain conclusions. The limitations, however, to this practice are that these methods are mostly beneficial for serial crimes and not in the case of a single crime, as I already mentioned. They're mostly useful against impulsive crimes by impulsive offenders, because they leave behind a lot of other clues and physical evidences that can be used in order to trace their personality character traits and drop a behavioral profile. it may not be able to distinguish between multiple offenders operating in the same area and following similar MO. So if there's more than one perpetrator located in a similar in a single area where both of them are resorting to the modus operandi of attacking from behind and strangulating, it becomes a little difficult to distinguish which crime is committed by whom when. So it can be a little confusing at that point. And there's also limited accuracy of algorithms of computer system that cannot analyze all the relevant information involving a series of crime. There's certain nuances that computer systems and IT systems cannot identify, and that's what makes it the discrepancies but I think at the end of the day, it also depends on the fighter, which I think which not just comes with knowledge and learning, but also with a lot of experience. It's better at through field experience. So with that, I would like to conclude this presentation. I would be covering another topic on psychology of assault. But if there's anyone who might want to ask anything or add on to anything that has been discussed,
Ma'am, there is a question in chat box.
Okay, that's a good question, Saubhagya. So when we talk about organized criminal and disorganized criminals, what we're basically talking about is their modus operandi, right? So what were the various ways, what were the various strategies that the individual decided to undertake in order to commit the crime? So if it is an organized criminal, they would have certain criteria set in place right from the point of victim selection to preparing for the crime, to how the crime was committed, to the aftermath of the crime, to how the perpetrator was behaving after the investigation began. So, this talks about the amount of thought. So you can say the more organized would be considered in a court of law. Unorganized criminals, on the other hand, are basically more impulsive, they're more spontaneous. They are what would come under the category of opportunistic criminals, right? So there's not a lot of planning that goes into it. It's more on, oh, I feel something, I want it, I'm going to get it. Not thinking so much about how, when, what are going to be the consequences. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Sorry, ma'am. Your voice is not clear. It got stuck.
Largely by how
Anisha,
planned and organized the crime was. That is something that is deeply taken into account.
Ma'am, your voice was breaking. Could you please repeat?
Okay. Could you tell me where you lost me?
Actually, the entire sentence was like a starter. We couldn't even get a clear word.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry about that. I think there's some network issues. I'll repeat myself. When we talk about planned and unplanned criminal crime scenes, or organized or disorganized criminals, we're basically talking about the amount of thought and efforts that were put in. So when we're talking about planned and organized criminals, we're talking about those individuals who spend up to weeks and months planning and strategizing how they would commit their crimes, right? So right from deciding who they're going to target as their victims, how they're going to gain access to them, how they're going to then commit the crime, what are they going to do in order to dispose of or not dispose of the bodies if it was a case of homicide? Whether there were any attempts made to manipulate evidence or misdirect law enforcement agencies, whether they try to escape or run away or do anything to escape detection. All of this would come under organized crime, planned crime, right? Also, the nature of the crime scene. So an organized criminal would probably use certain things like like having gloves on, or making sure that they're not leaving any traces or physical evidences behind. Making sure that there are no witnesses around them. Anything that might incriminate them, they would try to rule out all those possibilities. Also, the precision and the skill with which the crime has been committed also shows how organized the crime, the criminal was, and certain things like how messy or clean the crime scene was, the way the victim was treated, right? All of these would come under organized versus disorganized, where there is a commission of crime, but the method, they're more spontaneous and impulsive and more act more on the pleasure principle, which is that if I want something, I'm going to get it by hook or crook right away, right? So there's not a lot of strategy that goes into it. And so it's, I think, logical to say that they are not as prepared to commit that crime at the same time. And so you can say that the possibility of finding physical evidences leading to behavioral evidences is much more in a disorganized crime scene than an organized crime scene. And whether it was organized or disorganized also has a large impact on the level of criminal liability imposed on the individual. I hope I was clearer this time.
Yeah, ma'am. There are a few more questions in chat box.
Yes. So I can see that there's another question on geographical profiling.
Yes.
Yes. So Siri, like I mentioned, geographical profiling is basically best suited for those crimes which are committed in a habitual manner by the same person. It has to be the same person. That is when it would be possible to arrive at a conclusive, you can say, judgment about who it might be that is committing the crimes in a particular location or across geographical locations. It's the nature of crime. It could be theft, it could be robbery, it could be burglary, it could be rape, it could be murder, it could be, the intention could be anything. But if it is a series of crimes being committed by the same individual across in the same geographical location or across vast geographical locations, is when geographical profiling would be best suited. Okay. Are there other questions?
Yeah, one more question is there in chat box.
Okay, so this question is about
neighborhood demographics.
Neighborhood demographics. How one can select a victim particularly for crime because some neighborhood victims easily available? Okay, I'm not sure I understand what you mean here, but I think what you're talking about is how do neighborhood demographics contribute to the selection of victims? Is that what the question is, Prajna? Yeah, so it does not necessarily have to be your next door neighbor. When we talk about neighborhood demographics, we're talking about what that particular individual has selected as their radar to cover, a geographical location to cover, where so say for example, Jeffrey Dahmer, right? Or let's say Umesh Reddy, right? Let's not always quote international cases. Let's talk about our Indian cases as well. So it was the case of Umesh Reddy that I had worked on a comprehensive behavioral analysis for the Netflix documentary Indian Predator. So if you guys have watched that documentary, you will observe that he targeted victims who were basically lone women who he could attack in lonesome areas where they would not be able to attract a lot of attention at the same time, right? So there his strategy was very clear. He is exploiting the vulnerability of those women, and then right 90s, right? So at the time, and even today, but more so then, if a woman is stripped naked publicly, and even though she knows that her life is at risk, she might be she might be on the verge of getting raped, she would still not go ahead and make a hue and cry about it, or try to attract crowd attention, because that would mean that her modesty is being outraged, right? That she would be socially humiliated, and there would be so much stigmatization that she would not, first of all, come out and outrightly say that this person tried to sexually abuse me or assault me, and also that would reduce the chances of them filing a police complaint. They were trying to kind of slip it in the bud itself by calling it a theft or a robbery, whereas more often than not there was a sexual intent in those cases as well, right? So here, when we're talking about neighborhood demographics, we're talking about victim selection based on, oh, this person is vulnerable, oh, this person is easily exploitable, oh, this person fits my, so in a lot of sexual cases, this person fits my idea of an ideal partner. I feel attracted to them. So what are the certain physical characteristics that make me attracted to them? And so on and so forth, right? So I think that's how they narrow it down, and that's how accessibility comes into the picture. Do we have other questions?
Ma'am, I'm very happy to have your lecture so far.
Thank you, sir.
This is Dr. Acharyalu. I'm the Dean of School of Paramedical Sciences here. Well, you have mentioned a nice one regarding the alternative medicine like Reiki, Buddhism, meditation, and yoga. Am I right or not? May I know your kind opinion, ma'am? Is there still Reiki followers in these days? Is it being workable?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Would you please correlate how it is going to be? Give an example. If you find out any kind of case studies.
I'm sorry, sir. There's a lot of disturbance coming from the background.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I couldn't make out what you were saying because there was a lot of on what, sir? I'm sorry, I missed the first half of what you were saying, sir.
Reiki, Buddhism, meditation, and yoga you mentioned as an alternative medicine. Am I right? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Is there still followers of Reiki, madam, in this world? Have you got any kind of case studies available with you? Have you come across any case studies with you, madam? How Reiki is going to be an alternative medicine?
Right. So I'm actually, first of all, very glad that you are aware of what Reiki is. Yes, sir. So I myself, meditation as a form of psychospiritual integration of children in conflict with the law, what we call juvenile delinquents, right, was largely related to this only. So what I basically did was, because I had to conduct it as in the form of a study, I had to limit down my subjects to 10 wherein I got them to practice certain mindfulness-based meditation, and I myself gave them Reiki because I'm a second-degree Reiki practitioner myself. I granted them Reiki every single day for 10 days, and on their mental, emotional, behavioral health, and in order to arrive at certain results. Like so you were asking me the relevance of Reiki in today's time, if it's still being used, and how we can integrate it into forensic settings. So, exactly. So in whatever little experience I have working with juveniles in correctional institutions, I've realized that most of the reasons why the current reformative measures are not as successful as we might want them to be is because we're targeting certain things like skill building, vocational training, arts and crafts without tending to their basic fundamental needs, which is that of care, nurturance, self-reliance, right? A lot of things that these children were deprived of growing up because of their dysfunctional families, because of certain adverse childhood experiences. So you say there is a juvenile there who has recently joined. You put them in a classroom, but they're in a state of depression. They're suffering from depression or anxiety or paranoia, or disassociation, disorientation. Could be so many things. Would that person be in the condition to be taking those lessons? No, because we have to first address the mental and emotional problems that the child is dealing with before they can get to the point of even accepting that education is important for me and that's going to get me to places. So only, and then they'll try to train them in mechanics or mobile engineering or certain menial jobs. Again, without taking care of those fundamental aspects of what makes them who they are, working on their self-esteem, self-worth, self-image, how they view themselves, how they view the people around them, how they view the world. That is where their basic philosophies, fundamental philosophies, notions, irrational beliefs about life and about who they are coming to the picture. So it is only when we target those. So when I say techniques like mindfulness-based meditations, Reiki, I did my dissertation on the same. So I also talked about the scientific mechanism behind how Reiki works. And it gives me immense pleasure to share with you all that through the Reiki and other psychospiritual practices that I administered on them, there were juveniles who were unable to sleep. They had insomnia, right? A sleep condition where a person is unable to sleep for a very long time. Most of them were on sleeping pills. And on the days that I gave them Reiki, they did not need to take that sleeping pill and they could sleep even if it was for those brief periods, only for a few nights, because I had to leave after because of time constraints. They could sleep without having to take sleeping pills after months and years. So Reiki is most efficient when it is applied for at least 21 days in a row, which was not something that I could leverage at that point. But I'm hoping and I'm speaking to concerned authorities and seeing if I can get the permission to be able to do that. Because only then will the problem be able to be eradicated from the root causes itself, and not just the trimming of leaves, but kind of eradicating the problems from the root causes itself.
Thank you, ma'am. You are very authentic in your presentation. If you are an expert in Reiki, definitely we'll have a workshop with you in Reiki also. Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Really glad to hear that. So looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that there are some more questions, ma'am, in chat box. If you could.
Sure. Okay, so when we talk about male to female ratio and serial killing, I think when we try to understand crime, it's very important to remember that when we're discussing characteristics of criminals, it would mostly be said that males tend to dominate this particular domain, right? But at the same time, so say for example, hackers, right? When we talk about hackers, we would say that more than 90% hackers are male. But some of the best hackers out there globally are women, right? And there are a lot of reasons why. The biggest of them being anonymity, right? And the lack of suspicion. Because when you look a certain way, like how we all like to say that, if there's someone who looks very harmless, looks very non-threatening, it would be a little difficult to project them as a serial killer or someone who's going in conflict with the law, right? So using that cloak of anonymity and lack of suspicion, they kind of upgrade themselves. So the youngest serial killer in the world is a boy from Bihar. He's, I think, 6 or 7 years old. He must be older now. But at the time that he was committing the crimes, he was around 6 to 7 years old, right? So at the end of the day, I think more than male to female ratio, what it comes down to, or any third gender, what it comes down to is, so it's not just in the case of criminals, but any individual, any child would be shaped into the kind of adult, depending on the kind of childhood that he had. And this applies to every individual without exception, including you and me, right? So in the case of offenders, what happens is that there are certain biological factors. It could be congenital, meaning right from birth, because of, say, the mother was consuming drugs or was over abusing certain medications and so on and so forth while the child was in the womb. They would be vulnerable to developing certain neurological problems. Then on a psychological level, it could be loss of a very closed one at a very early point in life, right? Or being bullied.
ये ऑर्गेनाइज किसने करवाया था? एपी वालों ने, विलास ने किया था? अच्छा,
Well, I'm sorry, but yeah, thank you so much. So like I was saying, it's a culmination of biological, psychological, and social factors. We were talking about psychological factors. So adverse childhood experiences like childhood sexual abuse, witnessing or being the subject of certain aggressive and violent behavior, exposure to pornographic material, or even a violent or aggressive atmosphere and environment around you, where you are constantly encouraged, or your antisocial traits and antisocial behavior are constantly reinforced, where someone pats you on the back for having gone and stolen a mobile. So I'll give you a small example, okay? Say there's a child who comes from a very well-to-do family and goes to school, a very good school as well, but is constantly bullied there every single day. He feels dejected, neglected, and degraded over there. Versus when he comes back home and on the way to his place, he finds there are these slum children who get very excited every time they see him. And I don't necessarily mean that every child from the slum turns into an offender. That is just for the sake of this example. I've been to enough slums to know that that is really not the case. And I've met enough juveniles to know that they have much more potential and caliber than most children who are of their age group. It is unfortunately a lack of conducive environment which led them to becoming the way they are. In fact, I'm sure all of you over here understand Hindi. So I would just like to share something that my guide had told me before I went to
Anisha,
Hanji, sir.
actually most of the students,
Hello?
actually most of the students from Andhra Pradesh, they don't understand Hindi.
Oh, they don't. I'm sorry about that. In that case, I'd like to share that story in English itself. So what my guide told me right before I started with my work at the juvenile observation home was that if there is a child who has learned how to make two ends meet, bring food on his illusionary table, there is nothing about life that you can teach that child, right? They've learned more about life at the age of 14 and 15 than most people in their 60s have, right? Because of how life has been for them. So it is not about life and how right they can do life, not so much about morals and ethics that you have to teach them, but rather help them regulate themselves, understand themselves in a way that they have not been able to, and meet their needs, the needs that they were deprived of by virtue of a certain unfortunate incidents that took place with them in their lives, right? So what I was trying to say is that an individual with the kind of environment that they're surrounded with, for this case, an example, that little boy, when he meets this group of people, he feels very celebrated, he feels very acknowledged, right? So he feels like he belongs to this group. He has a sense of identity here. But then the dilemma is that I now need to fit into this group, right? This group I really like, they make me feel loved, but I need to become a part of this group. And say this group is involved in petty crimes like theft or using of force or threat in order to through observation or through instruction. And as he progresses, these group of children really encourage him, really appreciate him, really applaud him for what he has done. I'm sorry, there's someone who's unmuted themselves accidentally. Thank you. So in that case, what happens is that the child would then be more inclined towards acting in the manner that this group applauds versus his home environment and school environment, where he's being taught so much about life and principles and ethics and values and morals. But in words, but through actions, what is being reinforced for that child is completely different. So I think it's very obvious to think why he'll be more inclined towards adapting the antisocial behavior and activities of that other group. And with constant association and reinforcement, what happens is that they start developing certain ideologies, certain thought processes and values that are more against the law than pro the law, right? So at the end of the day, it is possible to even predict or kind of talk about if a certain individual is predisposed to developing criminogenic tendencies as an adult if we look into their childhood. Okay, death profiling. By death profiling, do you mean psychological autopsy? That's the next question that I'm talking about. Or death profiling of the victim? I am sorry, I don't understand the question entirely.
Saubhagya Dash, you can unmute yourself and you can ask questions.
Yes, please feel free to do that.
Ma'am, till that time, you can move to next question.
Sure. Okay. So this is actually a very interesting question by Siri. She asked, he or she, I'm sorry, I don't, it's an androgynous name. Says, can a group of people, thank you. Can a group of people commit serial killing crimes? If yes, then what's your thought on their mental state? Absolutely. In fact, this is something that is becoming more and more popular today because a lot of criminals out there are influenced by criminals in the past who've committed similar crimes in history, right? So that is one way that you're kind of carrying forward the legacy, right? But I think here you're talking about more than one individual committing serial killings at the same time, right? So that is something that we can call syndicate crimes or organized crimes. In that case, I think there's a lot of factors that come into the place, including the group hierarchy, like the group dynamics, right? Is there a leader in the group? Who makes the decisions? Who is responsible for? So it could be that all of them are committing the act together, or all of them are given specific responsibilities. Right? This has a direct impact. So this is based on the mental state. Now, if it is a very organized and planned way of doing something, which is majorly done for financial gains, monetary benefits, sometimes thrill seeking also, but also sexual gains, right? So in that case, it could be that all of them would commit the crime together, and then also the process of what comes after, which is eradication of evidence and including the body disposal, this, that, would be done together, or they would be doing it by the tasks delegated to them, right? It's done in a very organized way, like in any other company or an organization would work. So they're compartmentalizing who does what, when, and in what ways. The mental state, if you ask me, I would say, again, is very closely related to the association phenomena that we were talking about, right? So it is that one individual, so there's a group of individuals who share ideologies, who are on the same page about something that say the rest of the world would not subscribe to, right? So what is it that is keeping them, the group, intact? What is keeping them together? That is something that you can call collective trance, like a collective trance where they have they've influenced and impacted each other on a thought level, feel level, and behave level, right? So they're now many bodies, many in body, but one in mind, right? So this is an example. Like what happened in the Nirbhaya case is somewhat an example of that, right? It wasn't a serial killing, but we're talking about group mentality over there. So once an agenda is arrived at, for example, in this case, which is to gratify yourself sexually, right? If everyone agrees upon that, they are then willing to take on responsibilities that they need to in order to follow that pleasure principle, right? Pleasure principle basically would mean that you're not able to exercise enough self-control or your impulsivity, or think about the consequences of your acts towards yourself and the victim or victims, and acting solely for with the intention of deriving pleasure. And so your mental faculties are very restricted. It's like a tunnel vision, right? So you can say collective trance is something that can more or less explain the mental status of people involved. Not as simple as that. There are a lot of it's a culmination of factors that come into the picture. So it does depend on the specific and unique facts and circumstances of each case. Okay, how a hive is preferably used as hunting sites? Please give some examples. A hive is simply because they're so broad that and there's also not a lot of patrolling and all of them, not a lot of crowd around. So what happens is that again, when you're choosing your victims, that's limiting their possibility of escaping or finding help. And after you have committed the crime, so it is very easy to drag someone that you've caught on the highway and take them to a nearby isolated area, a forest, or any place that would give them good cover, and then easily escape from there, right? So you could hitchhike, you could get a public transport, or you could just vanish into the woods. So when we talk about highways as a preferable, one of the preferable hunting sites, we're just talking in terms of accessibility to victims and the possibility of easy escape. Okay. Understanding the daily routine of the victim also comes under victimology, how it differs from criminal victimology. So victimology is a different subject, all comes under criminology. Criminal profiling is one method of investigation and answering legal questions, right? When we're talking about daily routines of victim, we're talking in terms of victim selection. Selection would then lead to victim propensity, precipitation, and vulnerability. When we talk about these fancy terms, what we're basically trying to establish is that what was it that the perpetrator was looking at by following the daily routine of potential victims in order to understand who would be the easiest, who would give him maximum pleasure, and who would be easy to discard or get rid of, right? Or who would be the most susceptible, say if they target victims who are single or are orphans, do not or are not living with friends and family, and they go missing. The whole hue and cry around that case would be much less than someone who lives in a, say, joint family. So the daily routine of the victim is to establish all these factors and to understand, okay, so this is what the daily routine of this individual looks like. This is what he does when he wakes up in the morning. This is when he steps out. This is when he comes back. These are the kind of places that they visit. This is when they're around people. This is when they're alone. right? This is when I can capture them. This is where whether I'll have to leave my location, whether I can do it at their place, whether I can bring them to mine, how long I can. So a lot of serial killers also like to retain body parts, right, as trophies. So how possible it is for them to do that, and all these factors that come into the picture when it comes to victim selection. This in no way should be misinterpreted as putting the blame on the victim, because the attempt is not to arrive at conclusions like, oh, because you stepped out at night, you got attacked. That's not what we're trying to say. But how we would rather put that is that stepping out of a vulnerable individual at night in places where there is lack of patrolling, where there is lack of enough illumination, would make an individual more vulnerable to certain predators out there. So that's the kind of understanding that we arrive at through the study of crime and the criminals involved in them. I hope I've been able to answer most of the questions to your satisfaction.
Yes, ma'am. Now, ma'am, we can move forward.
Sure.
Ma'am, only half an hour is left. At 11:30, the session will automatically ends.
At 11:30.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I think I'll keep it very brief in that case.
Okay,
sure.
Yeah, better.
We're going to cover psychology of sexual assault.
Yes.
Just allow me to please share my screen.
Yeah, go.
Vilas, any more queries?
No, sir. Like little part is left by from madam's end.
But
Yeah.
that's only if you wish to, because that's slightly different. It doesn't necessarily come under the ambit of criminal profiling. We've covered most of the topics under criminal profiling. So maybe we can save it for some other session and we can wrap it up.
No issue, ma'am. No,
today.
you can
That's not a
continue
problem.
till 11:30. We can continue.
Okay, please let me know if my screen is visible. Is it visible? Hello?
Yeah, ma'am. Good to go. Just go to presentation mode. Presentation mode.
Can you see it now?
Yes, ma'am. Good to go.
Great, thank you. So when we talk about sexual assault, we mean any kind of sexual contact.
Ma'am, your voice is breaking.
Attempted handling in
Ma'am, your voice is breaking.
Is it any better now? I think my connection is a little unstable.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to see if there's a network.
Yeah, please come again. Please come again.
Is this better?
Yes. Please go ahead. Please.
Okay, thank you. So anything from attempted rape to unwanted sexual touching, forcing a victim to perform certain sexual activities.
Madam, please go.
Such as,
Yeah. Good to go, ma'am. Good to go.
okay, I'll go ahead. All right, thank you. All of these activities come under sexual attack or assault. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is considered the Bible for clinical psychologists, many sex offenders may have paraphilias, right? Paraphilias are basically sexual disorders. And antisocial personality disorders may be present in other sex offenders. However, not everyone with paraphilias or antisocial personality disorder becomes a sexual offender. So there is no direct connection between mental illness and sexual assault, though the mental health might have a direct impact on a sexual assault committed, or sexual assault may be why a person has developed mental illness.
You are called this.
Next, the issue of why people engage in this conduct does not have a simple answer. The subject of sexual offending is too complicated to be reduced to a single theory, and therefore multi-factor theories are stronger. When we talk about etiology of sexual offending, we're trying to understand why people commit certain sexual offenses. The reason that it's important to understand the reasons is because it helps us in developing certain successful prevention strategies. It provides valuable insight into the characteristics of various offending behaviors, including the preferred victim type, as well as the disposition to continue over time. Certain rehabilitation efforts can focus on the individual offender's distinct underlying causes and the paths to offending, and it also influences discourse and decision making at the policy level to develop and implement successful public safety initiatives. So it's not just remedy, but also prevention and cure. When we talk about theories, as I initially said, it's a multi-level theory that is closest to explaining sexually offensive behavior. But we'll also look at the single factor theories, because the culmination of these single factor theories that lead to the multiple factor theories. When we talk about biological factors, there's no direct causal association between sexual offending and the presence of biological phenomena. But there is research which goes on to prove that certain components such as brain abnormalities, hormonal abnormalities, genetic defects, or deficits in intellectual functioning, someone who's mentally challenged, might be more vulnerable to offending, even sexually. Then there is a feminist approach which says that examines the structure of gender interactions as well as the power imbalance between men and women. So male sex offenders are no different than regular males and are conditioned to accept, tolerate, condone, and even perpetuate sexual violence against women and children. So there are a lot of societies and cultures where it is acceptable for men to, say, domestically manhandle or domestically violate their own spouses, or not give any regard to consent if the woman is married to you, or say situations like where there's patriarchy and there's a lot of misogyny, where a woman is considered to fit a certain gender role, and the man is supposed to go out in the woods, chop timber and bring back, and the woman is supposed to cook that. So putting them in specific gender roles and being very rigid about that and not being flexible. And so thinking that so there are a lot of people, a lot of sexual offenders out there who carry irrational beliefs like, if I feel sexually aroused, I have the right to dominate or exploit or exercise unreasonable amount of control and power over any woman to fulfill my needs, right? Because the society and culture promotes that if you're a man, all your needs must be fulfilled. Again, not a single factor theory that wouldn't be applicable to everyone, but these are certain factors that come into the picture when we talk about the development of certain thought processes and irrational beliefs that lead to people behaving the way they do. Next, we have personality. This again, of course, comes from the work of Freud, which basically talks about how sexual deviation or deviance is a manifestation of unresolved issues that arise during a person's early development, right? Later personality theory suggested that early childhood relationships involving trauma or mistreatment could cause a child to internalize certain negative attitudes and beliefs about themselves and relationship with others, which affects how the child views sex and his or her role in sexual relationships. Now, to give you an example, there was one juvenile who I worked with. He was a 14-year-old boy who had raped a 5-year-old infant as a baby, right? And so you're at 14. So this is just a young boy who has just hit puberty, has no sex education, has no is not exposed to anything related to what he did in a healthy manner. But every time obviously the process does not go like you sit down with the child and you start targeting things, right? You talk about the process is largely dominated by helping them understand the relationship, the links between their childhood, what they're currently going through, and the subsequent behavior. So you have to understand their history, their background, where they come from, the draw social investigation reports, and look at a lot of other factors. And then comes the point of talking about the case specifically and the details and how it can be linked. So when we did get to that point, and every time we spoke to that juvenile about the case, he would blush, right? He would constantly blush, and that left in a state of absolute shock, because we felt like this child has no remorse, right, at a very young age. So that shows those are signs and symptoms of conduct disorder, right? So developing of psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies, which could and he could grow into an adult with antisocial personality disorder. But through probing, we got the clarity that it wasn't all these things, but the fact that he every day at night used to witness his father physically and sexually dominating and exploiting and violating his mother, because in a slum-like area, most of these children were from slum-like areas in Bombay. They were living under one roof, right, in a single room, and so he used to witness his father violate his mother. But in his mind as a child, he thought that this is my father expressing his love for my mother, and this is how we express love, right? So according to him, what he did over there was, because at this age, you do not have the mental faculties to distinguish between what is right and wrong. He has simply through observational modeling and mimicking behavior has learned that this is the way that you express love. And so then the whole process was about challenging those beliefs and getting him to understand the fallacy of what he was thinking. So what we're talking about is you're internalizing negative attitudes here, right? So what he did was internalizing those negative attitudes, and that in turn affected how that child viewed sex and his role in sexual relationships, right? At a time when he should not be engaged in sexual relationships in the first place. 14 is not an age which would be considered biologically or psychologically ideal for someone to engage in sexual relationships. Next is cognitive. People frequently try to reduce emotions of guilt and shame by making certain justifications, or as we call it, defense mechanisms of rationalization and intellectualizations, right? So we're constantly rationalizing your thoughts and actions through cognitive distortions, or what we call thinking errors, by denial or minimization of harm, or asserting the right or entitlement to the action and blaming the victim, or how people say, oh, she asked for it, or she wanted it, or I have the right to, I wanted to, and so I got it, right? When you're just completely incapable of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and through your own internalized talk are projecting it onto others. So the reality. Ma'am, you unmuted yourself. Ms. Neha. Thank you. So that plays a huge role in developing and encouraging certain thinking errors, and developing a sense of entitlement, where an individual can justify their bad behavior because it suits their needs and makes and helps them justify their actions. Then there's the behavioral and social learning, which is closely related to the association and reinforcement theory that I told you about, with the kind of people that you are surrounded with, and how much you are positively or negatively reinforced for certain actions, or how much you are punished or rewarded for things leads to the encouragement or discouragement of behavior. And in this case, there would be an association of with people who are involved in similar activities. In this particular case, we're talking about sexual offenses, and there's a reinforcement by that same environment, which propels you into carrying on those activities, even expand its scope. There's something known as a victim turned offender phenomena, which is something that is there's not talked about enough, but is very, very important, because I don't think I have met anyone in my life, whether a friend or an acquaintance, who has not been sexually abused as a child or abused as a child, right? So there are a lot of cases. What happens is that someone who was victimized as a child, who was a victim, due to their inability to self-regulate because of how tender they were when they experienced those incidences, or because of certain development of attitudes and beliefs like revenge, that a victim turns into an offender, right? And then the offender itself turns into a victim, and it's just this vicious circle of the abused becoming the abuser. right? So again, comes back to early experiences determining subsequent behavior in adulthood. Then we come to the multi-factor theories of sexual offending behavior. This is what we were talking about. The significant causation factors, according to Marshall and Barbary's integrated theory, that developmental experiences, certain biological processes, cultural norms, and the psychological vulnerability can emerge from a mix of these elements. It is not a single factor working independently. It's always an amalgamation of all these factors. Early negative or adverse childhood experiences like sexual abuse, physical abuse, and neglect. Poor attachment style, especially towards significant caretakers. If growing up, your attachment towards your mother, father, or significant caretaker, siblings, your peers, your school, everyone at your school, is not healthy, that leads you to develop low self-esteem, poor interpersonal skills, and poor coping abilities, right? So when that happens, you become you withdraw yourself, you want to isolate yourself, you become antisocial, depending on the cultural norms, you might develop certain misogynistic attitudes, right? And then as you hit adolescence, you start the cluster of neurons that are responsible for sexual arousal and aggression are clustered together, and so there is it's very challenging to discern between the difference between sexual desires and violence, and they end up culminating the two, right? Exposure to sexually violent pornographic content may lead to hatred against women, belief in certain rape myths, a lack of empathy and sympathy for victims, and an acceptance of physical violence against women, what we just talked about, along with positive reinforcement, which would further encourage behavior from translating into irrational beliefs to even motives. Men whose coercion have shorter voice is not audible, sir.
Yeah, now it's fine. Now it's fine.
Am I audible now?
Yeah,
Thank you.
now it's
Okay.
fine.
Right. So men who resort to sexual coercion are said to have short-term relationships and have negative feelings towards women. Men who are motivated by self-interest are more likely to act on hostile ideas than men who are motivated by compassion or empathy. So what this basically means is that growing up, if you do not have healthy attachment styles, right, and that, like I yourself incapable people. Yes, sir.
Again,
Was
there
there
was a break.
some problem again?
Yeah, yeah. Now good to go, ma'am. Again.
Okay. So my connectivity is stable as of now. I'm hoping that it remains.
Now it's
Okay.
good. Now it's good. Please go ahead.
Right. So, as I was saying, when a person feels, so it's not necessarily true, but that's what those are the kind of beliefs that they have been feeding themselves with, and the environment is also supporting that. So they tend to believe that they are incapable of formulating healthy relationships with other individuals, especially that of the opposite sex, right? So in that case, they feel like no woman, or in the case of women, and depending on the sexual orientation of the individual, no person of the opposite sex or whoever it is that they're interested in would voluntarily, out of their choice, right, willfully want to get into a relationship with them or engage with them in any way or involve themselves in any way, because they are not good enough, or they do not they don't meet the criteria that the so-called normal people set for partners or look for in partners. So when you're constantly, building narratives in your head and then using such beliefs, irrational beliefs, to convince yourself that it is true, but then you have this pleasure principle, right? You're also chasing your pleasure and everything that you want, your needs, your desires. So in that case, what happens is that then you method to what they desire, and so a lot of offenders out there tend to keep body parts, keep them, is not just because they're evil, all of that. It's simply because they have been deprived of significant caretakers. So who are these random people who I might be interested in? Why would they be interested in me? So I'm going to find a way to be able to exercise. So no rejection. I will render them in a state where they cannot reject me, they cannot push me away, and I can also keep them for as long as I want to. Right. So a lot of them have also in their interviews and documentaries said things like I consume them. So cannibalism or necrophilia, when we talk about humans eating human flesh, that's cannibalism. Uh, it was not because, again, they were satanic, but because, of course, there is some pathology attached to it, why they want to consume their victims. But one of the major factors is for them to believe that that person who they liked or were attracted to, or had attributed some sort of personal gain from, has now become a part of themselves. And what can be more intimate and personal than integrating yourself with that individual, right? So you can imagine the level of depravity there, how deprived they are of all those needs which they themselves consider themselves incapable of attaining. And because there's so much of chaos and conflict in their heads, they don't even think that they can go out there and talk to anyone about it. They don't think that there will be anyone who understands, and would rather be judged and reprimanded. So it's a combination of all these factors and the complicated way that these influence each other, that that people end up doing offensive behavior, going in conflict with the law of any kind. But when we talk about sexual offenses, these factors are of utmost importance. That brings me to the end of this session as well. If there are any questions, I'll be open to taking them.
Students, still, if you have any question, you can ask. You can unmute yourself and you can ask questions directly.
So there's a request to wrap up the session. Like I told you, I didn't mind ending it with the previous presentation itself. So it's if you need to be somewhere else, I would completely understand.
Yeah.
I think it's been a long enough session already.
Yeah. So if there are no any questions, then we can move forward. Pravallika, over to you.
Students, do you have any questions? If not, Reena ma'am will go ahead with vote of thanks. Reena ma'am?
Actually, madam has left the meeting. She'll join once again.
Yes.
So till that time, students, if you have any question, you can ask. Ma'am, it was a really nice session. So we would like to have you physically at our campus. So soon we'll invite you for that.
Thank you, sir. I'm really glad
Yeah.
that you feel that way.
I'm sorry, it got disconnected.
I too would love to visit your campus.
Yeah, ma'am.
That's fine, ma'am. We can hear.
Yeah. Reena ma'am, now I request Reena ma'am to please propose vote of thanks.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Now it's audible.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Guest speaker, Ms. Anisha, respected sir, HODs, faculties, and our dear students. I'm Reena Jhamtani, Associate Professor at Odisha. On behalf of School of Forensics and CUTM, I extend my warm welcome to the people gathering over here. I would like to express my gratitude to all the students of the webinar for the presence and interactions and contributions to make this webinar a success. I extend my gratitude to Ms. Anisha to take out her time from a busy schedule to grace the event. Ma'am, thank you so much for your valuable insights. We could get differences with psychological analysis, geography. A special thanks to AP campus team for their efforts and CUTM for providing the immense support to make this webinar successful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for those kind words. I would again like to thank you also, Ms. Pravallika, for reaching out to me. I was looking forward to this session, and I wasn't expecting such a huge crowd of students. So thank you all for attending, and thank you for keeping it interactive. I too would love to visit your campus physically someday, and looking forward to that. I hope you found the sessions worthwhile.
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Thank you so much. So with the permission of organizer, Vice Chancellor Sir, Registrar Sir and Dean Sir, I declare that today's webinar is over. Thanks to one and all. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone. Thank you so much. Good day. Bye-bye.